Adrian Hawksford, Duke of Aldermere, set the brass card case down so carefully that the green baize swallowed the sound, and said the sentence that would burn his life to its foundations. My estate against your note, Edmund. By morning. The candle stubs at the long table guttered when the Marquis of Benrith smiled, a slow, satisfied tilt of the mouth that he had been practicing since he was 19 years old, and waiting to inherit something that was not his. Aldermere itself, the hall, the park, the rents. Edmund Hawksford turned the rim of his glass between two fingers, indolent and unhurried. By morning is a narrow window, cousin. What precisely would you like to demonstrate? That the Marlowe girl in the green bedroom upstairs will be in tears before the household is awake. Adrian's right thumb passed, once, across the worn silver of his signet ring. You have insinuated all evening that I cannot keep order in my own house. Very well. I shall keep it. By the time her maid takes up her hot water at 6, Henrietta Marlowe will have wept. Wept for what, dear boy? For her father. For whatever your hand has been quietly doing to her father's trust these last 8 years. Adrian's voice was clipped, fact ending. You raised the matter at the table, Edmund. You may name the proof yourself in the morning. In the corridor beyond the half-open dining room door, 25 years old that month, and standing in a borrowed indigo travelling gown, because her own had been ruined on the road, Henrietta Marlowe pressed the inside of her right wrist with her thumb, the place where her brother Tobias had once tied a strip of ribbon when she was 12 and he was 14, and dying, and listened to a duke wager his estate that he could break her by sunrise. Her laugh, when it came, was almost silent. Almost. The footman at the sideboard caught the corner of it and did not raise his eyes. She walked back to the green bedroom on the second landing without making any sound at all, sat down in her father's blue shawl by the fire, and was still laughing, quietly, into her hand, with her eyes very wide, when the long case clock in the gallery struck midnight. She did not weep. She had 6 hours. So did he. Adrian did not return to the dining room after Edmund left. He went instead to the library, where the lamps had not been lit, and the window faced east towards the parterre, and the locked east wing study that he had not opened in 8 years. He stood at the cold pane, with his hand flat against it, and breathed once, twice. A breath he had taught himself at 19 to breathe instead of doing anything irrevocable. And then he sat down at the great mahogany desk in the dark, and began, in his head, to count the items that the morning would now require of him. He had wagered the estate, Aldermere, the 4 farms in the home valley, the timber stand at Westhanger, the Hampshire seat itself with its 300 years of granite and oak, wagered against a single signature on a marquis's note that Adrian, sober, would not have accepted on a bet half that size. He had done it because Edmund had implied, across the soup, that Adrian's father had been right to put a pistol in his own mouth at 55, rather than face his creditors, and that Adrian's hand was beginning to shake in the same direction. He had done it because Adelaide, his sister, was 18 and presenting at court in March, and the cost of her gowns alone would not be a small thing if Adrian had to break the entail of Westhanger to pay. He had done it because he had a horror of looking like his father, and a worse horror of being like him. And Edmund had always known exactly which thread of which weave to tug. He had done it because he had counted on Henrietta Marlowe crying. He saw her again as she had arrived 3 days ago, small for her age, brown-haired, tired about the eyes, in an indigo gown that had been her aunt's. She had laughed at the wet hem of it on the Aldermere step and apologized to the footman for the state of her travelling cloak, as though she had personally inconvenienced him. She had laughed again when Mrs. Pellew, the housekeeper, showed her into the green bedroom and explained that there was a draught at the window she had not yet had time to seal. Henrietta had said, "If I am to spend my 25th birthday in a draught, I shall consider it characteristic of my fortunes," and laughed. She had laughed when Adrian himself, awkward over the welcome dinner, had said her father's name aloud for the first time in 15 years. She would weep tonight. He had wagered the estate on it. He pressed his thumb against the rim of the brass card case and felt the cold metal go very, very still under his hand. In the green bedroom, Henrietta took off the indigo travelling gown, hung it on the screen by the fire, sat down in her stays and shift on the embroidered stool, and unfolded, for the 800th time in 12 days, the letter that her aunt's solicitor had delivered to her on her 25th birthday. It was 4 lines long. It was in her father's hand. The ink had thinned to a colour somewhere between brown and rust. Henrietta, by the time you read this, I shall have entrusted your mother's silver and the trust I made, in your brother Tobias's name, for the orphans of my old regiment, the 14th Foot, to my friend Aldemir, who will keep it safe until you can claim it. He has been a generous friend. Watch his son. She had not, in 12 days, decided what watch his son meant. She had assumed it meant trust him. She had assumed her father's friend, the old Duke, now 8 years dead, had passed the keeping into the hands of his own son, Adrian, in proper succession. She had come to Aldemir in November because she was 25, and the trust was hers to claim, and because the old Duke's son had written to her 4 weeks ago, saying that the letter and the trust documents were sealed in his late father's study and could be opened only in her presence. Now, on a wet Tuesday in November, a duke had wagered his estate that he could make her weep by sunrise. She laughed again, into her hand, and went and put more coal on the fire. The brass scuttle made a clank when she set it down. Tobias, she thought, you would find this entirely funny. She pressed her thumb against her wrist where the ribbon had been. She could no longer remember the exact shade of it, only that it had been clean linen, and that Tobias, 14 and yellow with the fever, had tied it on her with hands that no longer worked correctly, and made her swear she would keep laughing for the both of them. She had kept the promise for 13 years. She had not, in those 13 years, broken it. She was not going to break it tonight for Adrian Hawksford and his cousin. She combed out her hair. She put on her shawl. She lit the second candle. She thought, if the Duke has 6 hours to make me cry, then I have 6 hours to find out what is in the East Wing study, and I have 6 hours to decide whether he is my father's friend's son or his cousin's man. Then she sat down by the door with a book of her father's that she had brought from home, Linnaeus, in a battered school edition, and began, in her excellent and somewhat unfeminine Latin, to read the names of the violets. At 2:15 she heard footsteps in the corridor. She did not stand up. She turned the page. The footsteps stopped outside her door. There was a long silence in which she could hear distinctly the breath of the man on the other side of it. Then a low knock. 3 taps, the third softer than the first 2, as though the knocker had reconsidered halfway. "Your Grace," she said, without raising her voice. "If you have come to make me weep, you might at least have brought a more imaginative pretext than the corridor at 2 in the morning." There was another silence on the other side of the door. Then, "Miss Marlowe, may I come in?" It was not a question. It was not quite an order. It was the voice of a man who had spent the last 2 hours discovering that he could not unsay a sentence. "You may come in," Henrietta said, "if you are willing to be laughed at." The door opened. Adrian Hawksford filled the doorframe the way only a young man bred to country horses and old halls can fill a doorframe. Broad through the shoulder, dark-haired, grey-eyed, 27 years old, and white about the mouth. He had not, she saw at once, slept. He was still in his evening coat. He had not even troubled to remove his cravat. He carried a single candle in a brass holder and a folded sheet of paper in his right hand. He stopped a careful 4 paces from her chair, set the candle on the writing desk, did not look at her. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "I owe you, in particular, an apology. I have done you a wrong tonight that I do not intend to repeat, and that I cannot in honor leave standing till morning." She lifted her eyes from the Linnaeus. She closed it on her thumb to keep her place. "You wagered your estate on me, Your Grace." "I did." "In your dining room? To your cousin?" "I did." "At, I take it, the soup course?" "At the fish." A small, startled sound escaped her. Not laughter, exactly, but its threshold. She set the book on the floor at her feet. "Your Grace, if you must bet me to ruin you, you might at least have placed me higher than Newmarket odds. The mare in your second stall is worth more than my dowry. You would have got terrible value." He was looking at the carpet between them. The carpet was a plain blue Wilton. "I am aware." "Are you also aware," Henrietta said, "that your front stair carpet, the green one with the gold band, was patched in 3 places in 9? The housekeeper does not, I think, know that I notice these things, but I notice them. The estate is mortgaged, Your Grace. You did not, when you wagered it, wager what your cousin thinks he is now to inherit. You wagered the patched carpet, and the draught at my window, and Mrs. Pellew's quiet anxiety about the timber sale that is supposed to clear the West Hampshire encumbrance by Lady Day." He looked up. For the first time since he had crossed the threshold, he actually looked at her. She returned the look, calmly, with her thumb on her wrist where the ribbon had been. "And yet," she said, "you did wager it. Why?" For a moment, she thought he was not going to answer. He stood at the desk with his hand flat on its edge, and the candle threw the shadow of his shoulder on the wall behind him like the wing of a tired bird. Then he said, very simply, "Because my cousin implied, at the soup, that my father had been right to do what he did, and I had been waiting for someone, anyone, to imply it to my face for 8 years. He chose tonight. He chose you as the wager, because he knew I would not refuse a wager that pivoted on you. He has been the executor of your father's trust for 8 years, Miss Marlowe, and he has been afraid for 8 years of what is in the East Wing study. He raised your name at the table to draw the wager so that, by morning, he could ride to the study with my signed forfeit in his pocket and quietly clear the inconvenient documents from my father's desk before any of us laid hand on them." She held very still. "You are telling me," she said slowly, "that your cousin is the trustee of my father's bequest?" "He is the second trustee. My father was the first. On my father's death, the trusteeship descended to me. Edmund has, by my failing, been administering it on my behalf, with my signature, for 8 years. I have signed what he has put before me. I have not opened a ledger of it. I have not, until tonight, asked what he has done with it." "And what," said Henrietta, "do you believe he has done with it?" "I believe," Adrian said, "he has been spending the trust capital on his own debts. I believe the documents in the East Wing study would prove it. I believe that is why he proposed the wager. I believe, Miss Marlowe, that I have just signed the deed of your dispossession in front of him. And I have come to your door at 2 in the morning to tell you this, because the alternative is that you walk down to breakfast at 8:30 in the dark." She was silent for a long time. The fire shifted in the grate. The clock in the gallery struck the half hour. She did not, in any of those seconds, weep. "Your Grace," she said at last, "did you intend to make me cry?" "No." "What did you intend?" "To win the wager, quickly, by telling you something deliberately unkind, watching you weep, and ensuring that by sunrise the Marquis was paid out of my own purse, rather than out of the trust. I had supposed I could afford that loss. I had not understood that he would also collect the study." She looked at him. "What unkind thing," she asked, "were you going to say to me, Adrian Hawksford?" He swallowed. "I was going to tell you," he said, "that your brother Tobias died Because your father spent the cost of a surgeon on a charity trust he could not afford to fund. I had a letter to that effect among my father's papers. It is not true. I knew it was not true. I was prepared to use it. I am ashamed of having considered it. That is what I came to apologize for. The Linnaeus was on the floor at her feet. The brass scuttle was at the hearth. The indigo gown hung over the screen, drying. Henrietta did not move at all. Then she laughed. It was not a polite laugh. It was not exactly an amused one. It was the laugh of a woman who had spent 13 years keeping a promise to a 14-year-old boy with yellow hands. It was the laugh of a woman who had just been told, plainly and at 2 a.m, that the man at her door had decided he would rather forfeit his estate than execute the lie. It was a laugh that contained, Adrian discovered, standing very still in the doorway, a quantity of fury, and a quantity of grief, and a quantity of welcome, but he had not earned. "Your Grace," she said, when she could speak again. "Sit down." He sat down. He sat on the edge of the writing desk because he did not trust himself to take the chair opposite hers. "You have 3.5 hours, she said, before the Marquis is at your door for the forfeit. Have you any objection to spending them with me, reviewing the contents of your father's study, on the chance that we can be there before he is?" "None." "And if I cry between now and morning, Your Grace, will you still consider the wager won?" "No," he said. "If you cry between now and morning, Miss Marlowe, I shall consider that I have failed you twice, and I shall in any case forfeit Aldermere at sunrise. To my cousin, if I must. To you, if I can." "To me?" "As trustee," he said, "of your father's bequest. You are owed restitution. I am content for the estate to stand as security against it, and I shall sign whatever paper is needed to that effect. I should have done it a week ago." She stood up. She picked up the candle. She set the Linnaeus on the desk beside the brass card case Adrian had brought up with him without knowing he had brought it. "Then come," she said. "Show me the East Wing study, Your Grace, and kindly do not, while you are showing it to me, attempt anything else unkind. I am laughing more than I have laughed in 12 days, and I should hate for you to spoil my run of it." Adrian Hawksford, Duke of Aldermere, took up the candle she had set down, opened her chamber door, and led her, at 2:30 in the morning of his 8th November as Duke, towards the locked study where his father had shot himself. She walked behind him with her thumb on her wrist where the ribbon had been, laughing, very quietly, in the dark. The East Wing had been closed for 8 years. The doors at the head of the corridor were locked twice, once with the iron house key, and once, beyond it, with a smaller brass mortice that Mrs. Pellew had carried on her own ring since the night the household had carried the old Duke out. Adrian had taken both keys from the housekeeper's office on his way to the green bedroom. He had taken them, he realized now, before he had decided what he meant to do. His hand had decided before he had. He fitted the iron key. The wards were stiff with disuse. He had to lean his shoulder against the heavy panel for a moment before the bolt drew. Henrietta stood behind him with her single candle, saying nothing, looking, he could feel it, at the back of his neck. The door opened on cold. He had expected dust. There was dust. He had expected the smell of old smoke from the fire that had not been lit in 8 years. That, too, he had expected. He had not expected the air to be quite so still. It was the stillness of a room that had been waiting. "Your Grace," Henrietta said behind him. "After you, I should hate for the first foot in this room in 8 years to be a stranger's." He stepped into the study. It was not, he discovered with a tightness in his chest he had not anticipated, terrible. He had been afraid for 8 years that the carpet would still bear a stain. The carpet was a faded Aubusson, blue and rose, and bore no stain at all. He had been afraid that the desk would have been left as his father had left it. The desk was bare, except for an inkstand, a small brass divider, and a wooden box of foolscap. The blotter had been changed, the pen tray had been cleared. Someone, Mrs. Pellew, he supposed, with the second key on her ring, had done him this small mercy. He turned slowly in the centre of the room. Henrietta set the candle on the mantel. The clock above the chimney-piece had been wound, 8 years late, at some point in the last 12 days. He heard it ticking now, gently, into the cold. "Has anyone been in here?" he said. "Since?" "Yes." Henrietta did not raise her voice. She moved past him to the desk, set her hand flat on the foolscap box, looked up. "Your cousin. Twice. Mrs. Pellew told me on my second evening when she brought up the warming pan. She has resented him for it. She was not sure whether to mention it to you. She had decided, the housekeeper said, that you would discover it in your own time. I am sorry to be the one in the room when you discover it." He laughed once, short and unamused. "Then we shall not waste my discovery of it. The trust ledgers, if Edmund has not removed them, would be in this desk. The papers your father lodged with mine, the same. The receipts of the Regimental Orphans Fund, the same. We have, by your calculation, 3 hours. 2 hours and 50 minutes, she said, glancing at the mantel clock. We had best be efficient. Where would your father have kept the ledgers? Left-hand drawer. Top. The deeper one beneath it for the documents themselves. The cabinet behind the screen for anything signed but not yet entered. She did not ask how he knew this. She did not, he noticed, ask anything that would force him to explain how a man could know the geography of a desk he had not opened in 8 years. She simply went to the left-hand drawer, drew it, and lifted out the ledger on top. He watched her by the candle. The brown of her hair caught it. The shadow of her shoulder fell across the page. She read the way she had read the Linnaeus, quickly, with the line of her brow drawn down, her thumb against her wrist when she came to a column that did not add. She was beautiful, he realized, in a way he had not registered before. Not the polished beauty of a London season, the harder, less convenient kind. The beauty of a woman who had decided, somewhere in her childhood, that she would not be the prettiest thing in the room, and had become instead the most exact one. He thought of her at the soup that first evening, laughing at the housekeeper's small, flustered apology about the draft, and felt, for the first time since he had laid the brass card case on the green baize, a clean line of shame. "Adrian," she said, without looking up from the ledger. She said it the way one says the name of someone one has known for a long time, and he understood, with a small interior jolt, that the name had slipped from her by accident, because she had stopped, in the last 40 minutes, thinking of him as His Grace at all. She did not correct herself. He did not correct her either. "Your cousin has been drawing 400 a quarter from the Orphans Fund for 7 years. The drawings are signed in your hand." "My hand?" "Your initial, tight on the right. I have seen it 3 times this evening." "On documents I did not read." "On documents he put before you over your father's brandy, I should think." She looked up. Her face was carefully neutral, the way one's face goes when one is being precise. "I do not say it to accuse you, Adrian. I say it so we know where we stand. He has drawn 11,200 from the fund since your father died. The fund's original capital was 16,000. There is, at this date," she ran her thumb down the page, 4,800 remaining, which the last quarterly notice from Coutts confirms, of which, by the regimental letters in this drawer, the entire fund is owed in pensions next Lady Day to 47 widowed mothers. 47. Including the mothers of my father's 3 closest brother officers in the 14th Foot. The fund he made in Tobias's name, for the regiment Tobias should have entered. Adrian sat down, quite quietly, in his father's chair. He had taken the chair without thinking. He realized it only now, with his palms flat on the worn, green leather of the arms. He had not sat in this chair since he was 18, on the morning of his birthday, when his father had taken him through the rents and walked him through the duties of the seat that would, his father had said in a tone Adrian had heard often and trusted entirely, come to him one fine, far day, and not before. He sat there now, 27 years old, while a woman he had wagered against on a whim at the fish course read in the names of 47 mothers his cousin had cheated of pensions in his name. "Henrietta," he said, "I will pay them." "Will you?" "I will, by Lady Day, whatever I have to break to do it." He looked at her across the desk. "And I will, this morning, before Edmund crosses my threshold a second time, sign over the trusteeship of what remains of your father's bequest to a person of your nomination. Your aunt's solicitor, if you wish. I have not the right to be your trustee. I have spent the last 8 years proving it." She set the ledger down on the desk. "You have spent the last hour and 10 minutes proving the opposite," she said. "Adrian Hawksford, do not, please, race me to be more shamed than I am at this moment. I have lived for 13 years on a promise to a brother that I would keep laughing. You have lived for 8 years on a promise to your father's memory that you would not look at the books. We are even. We are foolish in roughly the same way. The pertinent question is what we do at 6 o'clock in the morning when your cousin arrives at the front door expecting Aldermere." He looked at her. "What do we do?" he said. "We pay him out of the wager," she said. "From the wager, Your Grace, not from the trust. You wagered your estate. He has now, by your hand, won it. The instrument is signed. The instrument, however, requires a witness countersignature to be enforceable in the Court of Chancery before noon. You and I are alone in this study at 3 o'clock in the morning, with 2 candles, a ledger, and the only set of keys to the room. He cannot, before sunrise, produce a witness who is not asleep 3 counties away. He will arrive at 6. He will demand the forfeit. You will refuse to surrender the instrument until the witness is present. By the time he produces one, I and Mrs. Pellew will be in Winchester, with the trust ledgers in a strong box, and a sworn statement before the magistrate that the trustee has been embezzling the Regimental Orphans' Fund. The magistrate is a man called Lord Esmond Plover. He served, as it happens, with my brother Tobias." He had been watching her face for 90 seconds. He had not, in those 90 seconds, blinked. "Henrietta Marno," he said. "How long have you known the magistrate's name?" "Since I was 9, she said. "He was my father's second at his duel in 1797. The duel my father did not, in the event, fight, because he died of the influenza 3 days before the morning was named. Lord Esmond came to my mother's house with the news. He was a year older than my brother. He carried me, that afternoon, on his shoulders in our garden, because he did not know what else to do with me. I have written to him 3 times since I came of age. I have not, until this evening, been certain I had cause to call upon him. I am certain now." "You came to Aldermere already prepared to call on the magistrate?" "I came to Aldermere prepared, Your Grace, to find what I have found." She smiled at him, a small, exhausted smile that he saw, with a tightening of his ribs, was a smile she had practiced over 13 years until it was indistinguishable from the genuine article. "Did you suppose I had no idea what my father's friend's son had been letting his cousin do?" He drew a long breath. He put his hand flat on the green leather of the chair arm. He said, "No, I did not suppose. I am, this morning, beginning to understand that I have not, in any direction, supposed enough." "Good." She picked up the candle. "Then come. We have, by the mantel clock, 2 hours and 41 minutes. I shall require the regimental letters, the trust agreement my father signed in 1797, the orphan's quarterly correspondence with Coutts, and, if it exists in this room, your father's last letter to mine. I have, in 12 days, never been certain such a letter exists. I should like, by sunrise, to know." He took a key from the writing desk's small upper drawer. He had remembered the key the moment she said, "last letter." He had not thought of it in 8 years. "It exists," he said. "It is in the cabinet behind the screen, in a leather wallet with my mother's seal on it. He told me, on the morning of his death, that I was to send it to you when you came of age. Henrietta, I had forgotten." She did not laugh. She also did not, at this, weep. She put her hand briefly on his sleeve, on the back of his wrist, in fact, where his pulse stood, and let it fall again before he had time to know what to do with the touch. "Then let us find it," she said, "before he does." They worked by the 2 candles and the small banked fire that Mrs. Pellew, summoned from her bedroom at 3:20, with the second key already in her apron pocket, had built up in the study grate with a brisk competence that suggested she had been expecting this summons for at least a week. "Your Grace," Mrs. Pellew said, when the fire was drawing, and bobbed a curtsy that was 3/4 efficient and 1/4 audit. "Miss Marlowe." "Mrs. Pellew," Henrietta said. "Could I trouble you for tea, do you think? And for the strong box from the muniment room, and for the undercoachman to harness the bay mare to the chaise by 5:30 at the latest. We are riding for Winchester at dawn." "I shall have the tea up directly, miss." Mrs. Pellew did not look at Adrian. She did not need to. "And the strong box. The bay is already harnessed. I gave the order an hour ago, when I heard His Grace go down to the dining room a second time. I assumed someone in this house would be making a journey by morning." "Mrs. Pellew," Adrian said, "how did you know—" "I have been 41 years in this house, Your Grace. I knew when your father was going to do what he did 3 days before he did it, and I told no one." Because there was no one in this house then who would have been believed if they had told. "I had decided, with respect, that if the present situation came to a head, I would do better than that." "Mrs. Pellew, don't, Your Grace. I should rather you didn't this morning." "I was only going to thank you." "Thank me at Lady Day, sir, when the 47 mothers are paid." She set the strong box on the desk. "I shall fetch the tea." She went out. Henrietta stood in the doorway behind the closing door for a moment, with her hand on the jamb. "She is fond of you," she said. "She is fond of the house." "She is fond of you. You have not noticed. There are several women in this house who are fond of you, Your Grace, and you have noticed none of them. Some of them are upstairs. One of them is your sister." He laughed, a short, surprised laugh, the first real laugh he had made in 8 years. He did not, at the moment, know that he was making it. "Henrietta Marlowe, Adrian Hawksford, you have, in the space of 1 hour, given me an audit of my carpets, an audit of my trust accounts, a plan of action involving a magistrate in Winchester, and an audit of my domestic affections. Is there anything in this house that you have not, in 12 days, noticed?" "The cellar," she said. "I have not, as yet, made any audit of the cellar. I shall require, before we ride, a glass of something. Do not, Your Grace, mistake the joke for indifference. I am terrified. I should also like a piece of bread and butter. We are going to be in Winchester for 4 hours." He stood. He went himself to the bell rope. He did not ring it. He looked at her instead. "You said terrified." "I am 25 years old, Your Grace. I have spent the last 40 minutes discovering that my father's friend's son has been the unwitting signatory of my dispossession, that his cousin is a thief, that the magistrate I am about to ride to is a man who carried me on his shoulders in 1797, and that the only person in this house who knew what was coming was the housekeeper. I am also, I believe, slightly in love with a man I should ideally still be calling Your Grace at 3:40 in the morning. Of course I am terrified. I should be a fool not to be." He had heard, in the last hour, a great many things he had not anticipated. He had not anticipated this. He sat down again, in his father's chair. He looked at her across the desk, at her steady brown eyes, at the line of her brow, at the wrist where her thumb still rested against the pulse, And he said, with a deliberate care he had used in his life perhaps 4 times before, "Henrietta, I should also be a fool not to." She did not laugh this time. She let her hand fall from her wrist. She came round the desk, took the leather wallet that bore his mother's seal from where he had set it at his elbow, broke the seal, unfolded the single page within it, and read. "Marlowe, old friend, I have not many hours. I've made a poor job of the last 10 and a worse of tonight. Tell your girl, when she comes, that her father's trust is sound, and that what is owed by my son's hand, if not by his head. Adrian will be honest. He will not be clever. Watch his cousin. Aldemir." She set the page down on the foolscap. "Your father wrote this," she said, "the night he died." "I know." "He knew then. He knew Edmund." "He knew Edmund." "And he trusted you." "He hoped, I think, to trust me. I have not, in 8 years, made the hope good. I am about to begin." She nodded once. She folded the page. She put it into the strong box with the trust agreement and the regimental letters and the orphan's quarterly correspondence and the ledger that bore Adrian's initial in £11,200 of his cousin's drawings. She locked the box. She set the key in Adrian's hand. "Then begin," she said. It was, by the mantel clock, 20 minutes past 4. They had an hour and 10 before Edmund would be at the gate. In the breakfast room at 20 minutes past 5, Mrs. Pellew set down a small, beautifully prepared tray. Bread, butter, cold ham, 2 boiled eggs, a pot of strong tea, and a single white rose in a stem glass that she had taken from the conservatory in passing, and stood back from it with her hands folded against the front of her grey serge apron. "I have not," she said, "in 41 years in this house, served breakfast at 20 past 5. I am pleased to discover that the kitchen range is equal to the occasion." Her eyes flickered over Adrian, and over Henrietta, and back. "Will Miss Marlowe be returning by dinner, Your Grace? Or am I to keep her bedroom aired for tomorrow morning?" "By dinner," Henrietta said. "I shall not be away longer than the magistrate's office requires. Mrs. Pellew, your sister married, did she not, a man whose brother served in the 14th Foot?" "My sister married a man whose brother died at Talavera, miss." Mrs. Pellew's chin lifted, very faintly. "He left 2 daughters and no widow's pension. I am, on his daughter's behalf, one of the 47. "Mrs. Pellew, I have known, miss, since the 2nd quarter of 1808, that something was wrong with the fund. I have, like His Grace, had the questionable luxury of being able to do nothing about it from where I stood. I am, this morning, very pleased that I am no longer obliged to do nothing." She paused. "Should you require, in Winchester, a sworn statement from a household witness who has seen the Marquis of Penrith in this house on 3 separate occasions on which he ought not to have been in this house, I shall be at the magistrate's office by 11:30. Henrietta looked at her. She did not, in any visible way, hesitate. She got up from the chair she had only just sat down in, crossed the breakfast room, and embraced Mrs. Pellew, briefly, firmly, the way one embraces a fellow soldier on the morning of an engagement. The housekeeper, for the space of 2 seconds, did not move. Then she put her left hand, once, briefly, on Henrietta's shoulder blade, and stepped back. "Eat your breakfast, miss. You have a long morning. There will be a hot brick in the chaise for your feet, and a second one in case the first cools." She went out. Adrian watched the door close behind her. "I have lived in this house," he said, "for 27 years. I did not know any of that." "You did not know it," Henrietta said, "because no one believed you wished to be told it. You wished, very plainly, not to be told." She poured the tea. She buttered a piece of bread. She handed it to him. Eat, your grace. You have not eaten since the fish, and that was, by my count, 6 hours ago. I should hate for you to ride to Winchester light-headed and explain it to Lord Esmond Plover as the lingering effects of your wager. He took the bread. He looked at her over it. He was not certain, even at that moment, that he had earned to laugh at the line. And he did, anyway, a quiet half-laugh that opened in the corner of his mouth and did not, on the whole, ask permission. She returned it. He thought, I have known this woman for 12 days. I have wagered her welfare against my estate 4 hours ago. I have, in the last hour and a half, fallen out of love with a version of myself I was not aware I had been preserving. I am about to fall in love with her. I am, perhaps, already there. If we live through the next 90 minutes, I should like very much to spend the rest of my life not, in any direction, surprising her with my bad behavior. He did not say any of that. He said, Eat your bread, Henrietta Marlowe. The chaise is at the door. She ate it. At 20 minutes to 6, the chaise rolled away from the Aldermere step, with Henrietta and the strong-box inside, and Mrs. Pellew, in her best black bonnet, on the seat opposite. The undercoachman had been told to make Winchester before 9. He made it before 8:30. Adrian stood on the step until the chaise had passed the lodge gates, and the lodgekeeper's wife had drawn her shawl tighter against the November dark and gone back into the lodge. He went, then, to the library. He waited at the window, with his back to the door. At 6 precisely, the Marquis of Penrith's barouche rolled up the gravel drive, lamps still lit, the Marquis's high colour, even at that distance, visible in the half-light. Adrian Hawksford, Duke of Aldermere, drew the brass card case from his pocket, opened it, took out the folded paper on which his cousin's wager instrument was written in Adrian's own hand, refolded it, returned it to the card case, and went out into the cold November morning to meet his cousin on the steps. The confrontation in the gravel drive was brief. "Cousin!" Edmund Hawksford swung down from the barouche with a man's club ease and held out a gloved hand for the instrument. "I trust the morning finds you in good order. Where is the lady?" "The lady," Adrian said, "is on her way to Winchester." A flicker, a very small flicker, in the corner of Edmund's mouth. "Indeed, to take the air. To make a sworn statement before Lord Esmond Plover, concerning £11,200, drawn from her father's regimental orphans fund over the last 7 years, in your hand, on documents bearing my initial." The flicker became a stillness. "You are tired, Adrian." "I am extremely tired, Edmund. I am also, I am pleased to discover, awake. The wager." "The wager," said Adrian, "is yours. By the strict letter of the instrument I signed at the fish course, you have won Aldermere by the terms agreed. The instrument is, however, unwitnessed. It requires, before it is enforceable in the Court of Chancery, a countersigning witness. I do not propose to provide one. I do propose to redeem it, this morning, at a price. A price. £11,200 in cash, lodged with Coots, in the name of the Regimental Orphans Fund by Lady Day next. The trusteeship of the fund transferred, under writ of seisin, from yourself and myself, to a solicitor of Miss Marlowe's choosing. I should suggest her aunt's man, who is in London and free of you. A signed acknowledgement, under your seal, of the drawings made from the fund over the past 7 years. A withdrawn claim in your own hand on the wager instrument. In exchange, I shall give you back this paper, intact, with no public action raised against you. I shall, in particular, instruct Miss Marlowe to forego prosecution. You will retire to your Berkshire seat. You will not, while I am living, set foot in this house again." There was a very long silence in the gravel drive. The horses of Edmund's barouche shifted in the cold. The lodge-keeper's wife, who was up at the upstairs window of the lodge and pretending not to be, breathed once on the pane and wiped it clean. "You are bluffing," Edmund said at last. "She is 25 years old, and her father has been dead 15 years. Plover will not move on her word." "Plover," said Adrian, "carried her on his shoulders in 1797. He has had 3 letters from her since she came of age. He is, by the magistrate's roll for Winchester, on duty until Saturday. The strong box she has taken with her contains the trust ledgers, the regimental correspondence, a sworn statement from Mrs. Pellew, the housekeeper, and my father's last letter, dated and witnessed by his physician on the night of his death, which expressly warned him of you." Another silence. "You are not your father, Adrian." "No," said Adrian, "I am not. Until tonight, I had assumed that was my only consolation. Sign, Edmund." Edmund stood in the gravel drive for 10 further seconds, with the look of a man recalculating an entire ledger in his head. Then he gave a small, soft, almost decorative laugh, the laugh of a man who has lost a hand at cards and is committed to losing it well, and reached for the paper. "I require pen and ink." "Mrs. Pellew has left both in the library. She anticipated you." "Naturally." They went up the steps together. They did not speak. In the library, Adrian set the brass card case on the desk, drew the wager instrument from it, set it open on the blotter, indicated the unwitnessed lower margin. Edmund, in his own hand, on the back of the paper, wrote, "I, Edmund Hawksford, Marquess of Penrith, withdraw, without reservation, the claim entered upon this instrument, and acknowledge, in respect of the Marlow Regimental Fund, the drawings made by my hand under cover of my cousin's initial, in the sum stated, which I bind myself to refund, with interest at 5%, by Lady Day next." He signed it. He blotted it. He set the pen down with the meticulous control of a man who has decided to lose with composure rather than with grace. He looked up. "Tell her," he said, "that she has a sharper tongue at breakfast than I had supposed at the fish." "I shall tell her," Adrian said, "that you withdrew without resistance. It will, I think, disappoint her. She had hoped to be present for it." "Cousin." "Edmund." The Marquess took up his hat. He stopped at the library door. He half turned. For a brief moment Adrian thought, and dismissed the thought as quickly as he had it, that there was something behind Edmund's face that did not, quite, belong to the languid drawler at the soup. A regret, perhaps, a small one. The regret of a man who would, in different circumstances, have been a better cousin to his cousin. It passed. Edmund left. Adrian stood at the library window and watched the barouche drive down the gravel until it passed the lodge gates and was gone. Mrs. Pellew had, without having been asked, left a covered plate of toast on the library desk and a fresh pot of tea and a single white rose in a stem glass that matched the one at breakfast. Adrian sat down at the desk. He drew the wager instrument towards him. He read the withdrawal once, neatly, in his cousin's hand. He folded the paper. He put it into the brass card case. He closed the case. He looked at the white rose. It was, he understood, Mrs. Pellew's particular form of speech. He laughed, quietly, without humour and yet without bitterness, and went to ride for Winchester to fetch his sister Adelaide from Lady Caroline Murchison's, who had taken her for a week's visit, and to bring her home before nightfall to the house she had not, in 8 years, been told the full truth of. He stopped in the conservatory on the way to the stable yard. He picked one further white rose. He took it up to the green bedroom and laid it on the writing desk where the Linnaeus had been. It was a foolish gesture. It was also, he discovered, the gesture he was going to make. He rode out. Henrietta returned at 20 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, in a borrowed black bonnet of Mrs. Pellew's that was a size too small, with the strong box still on her lap, with Mrs. Pellew on the opposite seat, looking like a woman who has spent the morning being very, very efficient with magistrates. Lord Esmond Plover, by Henrietta's account, had received them with no ceremony, taken the sworn statement in 25 minutes, raised the writ of seisin in another 20, sent a clerk to London on the express at 10:30 with letters to the regimental colonel and to her aunt's solicitor, and dispatched a parish constable in a closed carriage to Berkshire, with a summons that the Marquis of Penrith was to attend the Winchester sessions on Monday next. She told Adrian this, leaning against the chaise's doorframe in his gravel drive at 3:20, without exaggeration, without flourish, with the small, precise tiredness of a woman who has done a long thing well. She did not laugh, this time. He helped her down from the chaise. Her hand stayed in his for a beat longer than was strictly required. "Your Grace," she said. "Henrietta." "I should like, before dinner, to wash my face and drink something hot and not, for an hour, be required to be sensible." "Mrs. Pellew has already drawn you a bath." "I expected so." "Adrian." "Yes." She looked up at him. She was tired about the eyes the way she had been on the Aldermere step 12 days ago, only worse and warmer, and with a kind of unguarded steadiness in the look that he had not, in 12 days, seen in her before. "You did not, between 3 and 6 this morning, do anything ungentlemanly. You did not, in fact, do anything except sit on the edge of a writing desk and listen to me. I should like to put on record, before I go upstairs, that I noticed." He smiled, a slow, careful, complete smile that took the small lines at the corner of his eye and used them honestly for the first time in 8 years. "Henrietta Marlowe, go to your bath. I shall be in the library when you come down." She went. He stood in the gravel drive for a moment, looking up at the green bedroom's window. Mrs. Pellew, he saw, had had the curtains opened to the south, and thought, "I am 27 years old. I am about to keep a house that I had assumed 15 hours ago to be already lost. I am about to keep a sister who will, in 5 months, present at court. I am about to spend the rest of my life, if she will have me, with a woman who laughs." He laughed himself at that, twice, in fact, quietly, into the November wind. Adelaide came down the steps behind him, breathless, 18 years old, in a saffron pelisse. Lady Caroline had insisted on the saffron. "Adrian, it is not a colour I should have chosen, but I am informed by every milliner in Winchester that it suits me," and said, "Adrian, why did Lord Esmond send a constable to Cousin Edmund's house?" He took her arm. "Come into the library, Della. I have a great deal to tell you. I have been meaning, in fact, to tell you most of it for 8 years. Adelaide stopped on the step. 8 years? 8 years. "Adrian Hawksford, I'm 18 years old. I am, as you well know, perfectly fierce. You ought to have told me by 12. He paused. He looked down at his sister, at her bright, level, fearless eyes, so much their father's eyes, and yet so entirely her own, and said, with the quiet ease of a brother who has at last allowed himself a thing he had withheld for half her life, "Yes, Della, I ought to have. I am very sorry." She kissed his cheek, briskly, and went past him into the hall. "Tell me in the library," she said over her shoulder. "And do not, please, leave anything out on grounds of my sensibility. My sensibility is not nearly so fragile as you persist in supposing. I have read all of Lady Caroline's letters. I have, in particular, read the one she had from your housekeeper a fortnight ago. I have a great deal to say about Cousin Edmund. I have been saving most of it." She vanished into the hall. Adrian stood on the step for one more moment and felt, properly, deeply, in a way he had perhaps not felt since the morning he had been 18, and his father had walked him through the rents. The old solid weight of his name come back to him. He went in. The days between November the 6th and Lady Day passed at the pace at which days pass in country houses, where the household is making a thing right, with a great deal of correspondence, a great deal of small specific work, and, to the considerable surprise of 2 of its inhabitants, a great deal of laughter. The under-coachman discovered, on the morning of November the 9th, that the bay mare was now to be considered as Miss Marlowe's particular charge. Henrietta decided that she would not, between November and March, ride a horse she did not know personally. She and the bay mare reached an understanding by the 11th, and a small private friendship by the 15th. The mare, who had been called Tuesday for as long as anyone could remember, and had recently been called Tuesday in the genitive case, Tuesday's hock, Tuesday's nosebag, acquired, in Henrietta's mouth, an entirely new name. She became, by Adrian's amused admission, the Latin teacher. "I am riding to consult my Latin teacher," Henrietta would say in the breakfast room, and Adelaide would laugh, and Adrian would put down his coffee with an expression that he had not, 8 years before, known a duke's face was capable of making. Adelaide rode out with them on the 11th and the 15th and the 18th. She was, as she had said, perfectly fierce. She had also turned out to be, Adrian discovered with a quiet, pleased pride that crept up on him in increments through the 2nd week, extremely good company. Adelaide and Henrietta had taken to one another in the drawing-room at tea on the 3rd afternoon. By the 2nd evening, Adelaide had requested, formally, that Henrietta call her Della. By the 5th, she had requested that Henrietta tell her in detail and at length about Tobias Marlowe and the regiment and the ribbon and the promise. Henrietta had told her, with her thumb at her wrist and her voice unhurried, on the sofa by the morning-room fire, while Adelaide held her hand. Adrian, passing the morning-room door with a question for the housekeeper, had heard the steady murmur of his sister saying, "You must keep the promise, Henrietta. Of course you must." But Tobias would also have liked, do you think, for you to occasionally cry on someone reliable? Adrian is reliable. I should consider that one of his more boring features. Adrian had stood, very still, on the other side of the morning-room door for the space of perhaps 8 breaths, and had then turned round and gone quietly back down the corridor without disturbing the conversation. He did not tell Henrietta he had heard. He did, however, in the next day's post, send to a particular shop in Bond Street for a particular blue ribbon of clean linen, 1 inch wide, 3 feet long, in the colour Henrietta had not been able to remember. Mrs. Pellew received the parcel on the 18th and set it, without comment, on the writing desk in the green bedroom. It was on the writing desk on the morning of the 19th, when Henrietta came up after breakfast for her shawl. She stood looking at it for some little time. Then she went down to the library, opened the door without knocking — Adrian was at the desk with the rent book — and said, "Adrian Hawksford, how did you know?" He looked up. He put down the pen. He laid both hands flat on the rent book, very carefully. "I overheard. On the 18th, in the morning room. Adelaide had asked you about Tobias. I had been passing for an unrelated reason. I am not, at this date, going to apologize for having overheard. I am going to apologize for not having said so until now." She came round the desk. She stopped a careful 4 paces from him. "You sent for it from Bond Street." "Mr. Treadwell, of Treadwell and Sons, Saturday next. They have it on hand, apparently, in 3 widths. 3 widths? I asked for the medium width. I did not know which width Tobias had used. I should have asked you. I did not, at the time, feel I could ask you. I should like, very much in future, to be a man who can simply ask you." She came 1 further pace forward. He waited. "Adrian Hawksford," she said. "Tie it on me." He stood up. He took the ribbon from her. She had brought it down in the palm of her hand, and he laid her right wrist, very lightly, across his open left palm, and he tied the blue linen on it in a single firm bow. His hand brushed, in the doing of it, the place where her thumb had been pressed for 13 years. She did not, at that touch, weep. She did not, at that touch, laugh either. She drew her hand back, looked at the bow, drew her thumb across it once, and said, "You are an unexpectedly precise tier of bows." My sister, between the ages of 9 and 12, refused to wear anything not tied by me. Then I am in good company. You are. You are an idiot, Adrian Hawksford. I am aware. A different sort of idiot from the one I was prepared to be cross with. I have been working on the difference. She laughed. It was the laugh he had heard for the first time in the green bedroom at 2:15 on the morning of the 6th. The laugh that had contained, in some proportion, fury and grief and welcome. It was, this morning, considerably more welcome than the other two. She let him pour her a glass of Madeira. She let him sit down opposite her in the library, in the chair he had not, on the morning of his father's death, allowed himself to take in 8 years. He took it now, without thinking. She noticed. She did not, for once, say so. They sat together by the fire for an hour and a half. They did not, between them, exchange a sentence the corner of which would have meant anything to Edmund Hawksford in the dock at Winchester. It would, by then, have been impossible to. The library clock struck 11. Mrs. Pellew, passing in the corridor, knocked once, was admitted, set down a tray with a fresh pot of coffee and 2 cups, looked steadily at both of them, said, "Will Miss Marlowe be staying through Christmas, Your Grace, or only through to Advent?" and left, without waiting for the answer, because she had, by that question, already received it. Adrian set down his coffee. He looked at Henrietta over the rim of it. He said, "Henrietta Marlowe, will you stay through Christmas?" "And after Christmas," she said. "And after." "And after that?" "And after." "Adrian." "Henrietta." "I shall stay through Christmas. I shall stay until you ask me to do something larger. You may take your time. I shall not, in the meanwhile, go anywhere." "I have," he said, "been working on the larger question. I am not, this morning, ready to ask it. When you give me until 12th night." "I shall give you," she said, "until 12th night and beyond. I am not, at present, in any haste." He laughed. She laughed. The library fire, which had been low when she came in and which Mrs. Pellew had built up without comment in the course of bringing the coffee, settled, with a small contented hiss, into the warm. Adelaide's letter from Lady Caroline arrived on Friday the 20th. Adrian had been, in the 11 days since the wager, watching for it. Lady Caroline Murchison was Adelaide's late mother's closest friend. She lived in Winchester with her own 3 daughters, the youngest of whom was Adelaide's particular ally, and she had, 3 Tuesdays ago, before the wager and before the magistrate and before any of the recent business in the gravel drive, written to Mrs. Pellew with what Mrs. Pellew had described in the kitchen, with her hands folded, as a matter Lady Caroline did not feel she could put before His Grace direct. The matter, as it turned out, was this. Edmund Hawksford had, in the previous January, paid an unannounced call on Lady Caroline at Winchester, in the course of which he had explained, with the languid courtesy of a man inviting an act of cousinly assistance, that his cousin Adrian was, between us, Lady Caroline, and you will, of course, not repeat it, unsteady in his judgment, given to bouts of melancholy in the manner of his late father, and that, for the sake of the 18-year-old sister, whose presentation was to be Adelaide's first great social trial, it would be, Edmund had said, a kindness, perhaps even an obligation, for those of us who love the family to consider how a more steadying influence might be brought to bear on Aldermere itself. Lady Caroline had answered him with the cold politeness of a woman who had known the late Duchess of Aldermere extremely well, had attended His Grace's birth in 1785, and had not survived to her 73rd year by being credulous about marquises. She had sent Edmund Hawksford on his way, and had then waited, patiently but watchfully, to see what the Marquis's more steadying influence would in due course turn out to mean. She had written, on Tuesday the 3rd of November, 2 days before the wager, a letter to Mrs. Pellew asking that Adelaide be permitted to spend a fortnight at Winchester from the 4th, on grounds of bringing Adelaide's hat trimmings forward in advance of the season. The letter had reached Mrs. Pellew on the morning of the 4th. Mrs. Pellew, who knew the script of Lady Caroline's hand as well as she knew the kitchen range, had read the letter twice and gone to the green bedroom to see that Henrietta's linen had been aired. She had, privately, in her own breast, concluded that Lady Caroline was getting Adelaide out of the house because Lady Caroline expected something at Aldermere to break. Adelaide had gone to Lady Caroline on the 4th. The wager had been laid on the 5th. The strong-box had been on its way to Winchester on the 6th. Adelaide had been brought home, by her brother in a borrowed carriage and a saffron pelisse she had chosen herself, on the afternoon of the 6th as well. Lady Caroline's letter, the one Adrian had been watching for, arrived on the morning of Friday the 20th, and was opened in the morning room with Henrietta and Adelaide present, because Adrian had reached, in the second week, the point at which it had not occurred to him to open it anywhere else. "Adrian, dear," Lady Caroline wrote, in a hand still firm at 72, "I have today had a letter from Lord Esmond Plover, of which the substance is so very satisfactory that I have already poured myself a glass of Madeira at 11:30 in the morning to mark it. He tells me your cousin will surrender his trusteeship in writing, will refund the Orphans' Fund in full by Lady Day, will retire to Berkshire, and will not in future be received at Aldermere, or at any house with which I have a connection. He tells me also that this happy result is largely the work of a young woman of 25 named Marlowe, who is at present in your house, who has, as I have heard from Mrs. Pellew, who has formed in the course of a fortnight one of the more positive opinions she has admitted to in a decade, done you all a great deal of good. I should like very much to meet her, and before Christmas, if it is at all convenient. I am, as you know, a poor traveller in winter. I shall expect you to bring her to Winchester for one of my Wednesdays. Bring Adelaide. Bring, in particular, your housekeeper, with whom I have business of my own. C. Murchison." Adelaide read the letter over Adrian's shoulder. She made a small, satisfied sound at the back of her throat. "Henrietta, you have been formally summoned. Lady Caroline does not, I think, summon women she has not already decided to like." "I am flattered, Della." "You should be flattered. Lady Caroline disapproves on principle of half the women of her own generation." "I shall be on my best behaviour." "You should not, please, be on your best behaviour. Lady Caroline is bored by women's best behaviour. You should be precisely as you have been since Wednesday, only with your Latin teacher's name in the conversation rather earlier than usual. Lady Caroline will appreciate the Latin teacher." Henrietta laughed. Adrian set down the letter on the writing desk. He drew his sister to him by the elbow, and his, by some careful, deliberate, undelayed shift in the last 10 days, he was beginning to be unable to think of her as anything other than his. Henrietta to him by the other elbow, and stood for a moment with both of them anchoring him at the window. The lilac bough beyond the morning-room window, bare in November, frosted in early light, was visible across the parterre. He thought, in April, when the lilac opens, they will both still be in this house. They will both still be at this window. He did not, at that morning, know how nearly he was about to lose either of them. The first the household knew of the trouble was the rider who came up the drive on Wednesday the 25th of November at 4:30 in the afternoon. The household was at tea in the morning room. Adelaide was at the writing table with a piece of correspondence to Lady Caroline. Henrietta was on the sofa by the fire with the bay mare's stud book open across her knees. Adrian was in the chair opposite her, with the rent book and a small private smile he had only relatively recently learned was visible to other people. Mrs. Pellew was in the breakfast room, counting linen. The footman who admitted the rider showed him directly to the library and came up at once to fetch his grace. Adrian rose, went down, was gone for 10 minutes, came back with his face, Henrietta saw with the tightening of the small bones at the base of her ribs, set in a shape she had not, in 3 weeks, seen it set in. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at Adelaide. He said, very evenly, Edmund did not, in the event, retire to Berkshire. Henrietta closed the stud book. Where is he? On his way to London. He left Berkshire on Monday with 2 trunks and a letter of introduction to a barrister called Hartley of Lincoln's Inn. Hartley specializes in disputed wills and contested entails. He has filed, at noon today, a private suit in the Court of Chancery for the recovery of Aldermere itself, on grounds of, and I quote the rider, who had it from Plover's clerk, the Duke's documented incapacity to administer the seat, evidenced by his having staked it on a wager at his own dining table on the night of the 5th of November, in the presence of witnesses willing to swear to the fact. A silence. Adelaide put down her pen. Adrian, he cannot. He can attempt it. The instrument he signed in the gravel drive withdrew his claim on the wager. It did not bind him from initiating an unrelated suit on the underlying conduct. The wager itself, the fact of having made it, is, in his counsel's view, sufficient evidence of unfitness for the seat. He has, the writer says, 3 witnesses prepared to testify to the language used at the dining table. He intends to suit not for damages, but for committee of the estate. The entire administration of Aldermere transferred to a court-appointed committee for the duration of my, as he proposes to characterize it, recovery. Adrian. Della. He is bluffing. He is bluffing only to the extent that he does not believe he will win. He believes he can drag the suit out for 18 months. By 18 months, the household will be effectively administered by a committee. Tenants will not know to whom they pay rent. Bankers will not know whose signature they honor. The timber sale at Westhanger will be on hold. By 18 months, I shall be, by his calculation, sufficiently ground down to settle out of court on terms favorable to him. Adrian sat down in the chair he had been sitting in 10 minutes before, very heavily. He has, in particular, named in his complaint a young woman of 25, resident in the house since the 4th of November, of whom, and I quote, the Duke's increasing dependence on her judgment raises a further concern as to the soundness of his mind. He has named you, Henrietta. The fire shifted in the grate. Henrietta did not, for a moment, move. Then she said, I see. I am extremely sorry. You did not lodge the suit, Adrian Hawksford. You wagered Aldermere, yes, and the fish course on the 5th of November. You have, since then, raised 47 orphans' pensions, paid 2,700 against the East Hampshire encumbrance, dismissed your cousin from your trusteeship, told your sister the truth about your father, taught the bay mare to come to her own name, written to the regimental colonel in your own hand, and tied a blue ribbon on my wrist on the morning of the 19th. You did not do any of these things in the state of mind your cousin's barrister proposes to put before the court. You did them in the state of mind of a man who, for the first time in 8 years, was awake. That is the only state of mind that need concern us. Henrietta. Adrian. I am going to say something now that I have not, in 12 days, allowed myself to say. I am going to say it once. I have made it rather hard, in the last 12 days, for you to say what I think you have been on the verge of saying. I am going to make it harder still. I am going to ride to London at first light. I am going to call on my aunt's solicitor at his chambers in Lincoln's Inn at 10 in the morning. I am going to swear, before him, the statement that puts my own account of the events of the 5th of November on the public record before your cousin's barrister can put his. I am going to do this, in particular, in the form of an affidavit that names me as a person of independent means and standing, rather than as a young woman resident in your house. I am going, in short, to remove myself from your cousin's complaint as the lever by which he proposes to break you. Henrietta! I shall be 3 days in town. I shall be back on Saturday at the latest. I shall write to you every evening in the post. You will not, Adrian Hawksford, propose anything to me before Saturday. I will not have it said, by any court in any month that you proposed to a young woman of 25, resident in your house, in the week after she helped you take down your cousin. I am, frankly, not interested in being your housekeeper's character witness in the dock at Westminster. I should rather, by some considerable margin, be your wife in the orangery in April." Adelaide made a small sound, a sound of complete, surprised approval, and put both hands on her face. Adrian sat very still. He drew, after a moment, a single, careful breath. He said, "I shall not propose before Saturday." "You shall not." "I shall, however, write. Every evening, by the same post." "You may write," she said. "You may not, in the writing, propose." Henrietta Marlowe. "Adrian Hawksford." "I shall meet your conditions." "I should hope so. You have, of late, become a man who meets his conditions." He laughed. So did Adelaide. So, briefly, did Henrietta. Mrs. Pellew, in the breakfast room with the linen, heard the three of them laugh and made, with her hands folded against her grey serge apron, a private remark to nobody in particular that nevertheless reached the kitchen by way of the under-housemaid by tea. The remark was, "If the Marquis has indeed gone up to London to ruin them, he has chosen the worst possible moment to attempt it, for the household has not, in 8 years, been so unbreakable." Henrietta rode for London on the morning of Thursday, the 26th of November, in a borrowed grey travelling coat of Lady Caroline's that had been sent down by special messenger overnight, and reached Lincoln's Inn at 20 to 10 on Friday morning. Her aunt's solicitor, a man called Wickham, who had been her father's friend in the same year that the old Duke of Aldermere had been, and who had liked Henrietta since she was 9, saw her at 10 precisely. The affidavit was sworn before a master in Chancery at 11:30. By 2 in the afternoon, a sealed copy of it had been lodged with the court, and a duplicate sent by clerk boy to Hartley of Lincoln's Inn, who was, when it arrived, in the middle of his lunch. Mr. Wickham took her to a quiet luncheon-house in Holborn afterwards. Over a chop, he said, "Henrietta, you have done, today, an extremely clean piece of work. The complaint will not survive the affidavit in its current shape. Hartley will redraft. The complaint will continue. The complaint will not, I tell you this professionally and personally, succeed. The Marquis is, in any case, by Monday, to be in the dock at Winchester on the trust matter. By the time Hartley gets the redraft into court, his client will have a criminal record. Chancery does not look kindly upon Committee of Estate suits brought by criminal trustees. Eat your chop. You have, today, saved a duke." She ate her chop. She said, looking at her aunt's solicitor over the table, "Mr. Wickham, I have not, I should like to be clear, saved a duke. I have undone, on the public record, my cousin's barrister's most convenient lever. The Duke is, in this matter, perfectly capable of saving himself." "Henrietta." "Yes. I have known you since you were 9. You are 25. You are sitting in a Holborn luncheon-house in a borrowed grey coat. You have, in the last 3 days, ridden alone from Hampshire to London, sworn the cleanest affidavit I have taken in 15 years, and described the Duke of Aldermere, twice in passing, as we. Do you intend, on Saturday, to marry him?" "Mr. Wickham." "Yes. I intend, on Saturday, to ride back to Aldermere. I intend, between Saturday and Twelfth Night, to permit him to ask me a question he has, to his entire credit, agreed not to ask before Saturday. I intend, between Twelfth Night and April, to consider very carefully what answer to give. I intend, in April, to give it." Mr. Wickham laughed, quietly, into his chop. "Then I shall draft the settlement now. Bring it to me on the 2nd of January for your inspection. We shall keep your fortune separate, as is fashionable. We shall keep your father's trust, what remains of it, in your own name and your name alone. You will, in particular, retain the right to sit on the trustees' board for the Regimental Orphans Fund in your own person. I shall draft the clause. Mr. Wickham. Yes. You have known me since I was 9. I have. Will you do me the further kindness of telling no one in your office that the Duke and I have not yet, formally, settled any question? He raised his glass. It will be, he said, as though I had not asked you. She raised hers. She rode for Aldermere on Saturday the 28th at first light, in a clean morning of low frost over the Berkshire Downs, with Mr. Wickham's copy of the affidavit in the leather case at her feet, and Adelaide's daily letter, slipped to her by the innkeeper at Wantage on the Friday night, folded in her glove. She came up the Aldermere Drive at 20 minutes to 4 in the afternoon. She did not, she had decided, somewhere between Wantage and Newbury, alight at the front step. She told the under-coachman instead to take her round to the conservatory door. She walked through the conservatory in her travelling cloak, with the leather case in her hand, and let herself into the morning room by the garden-side French window without ringing. The morning room was empty. She set her case on the writing desk. She drew off her gloves. She crossed to the fire. She stood for a moment, with her hands held out to the heat, listening, as she had taught herself in 12 days to listen, for the small acoustic signatures of the house. The long case clock in the gallery, the kitchen door's faint thud through the green baize service door, the bay mare in the home paddock, the rooks at the home wood. The morning room door opened. It was not Adrian. It was, instead, the Marquis of Penrith, Edmund Hawksford, in his London coat, in the act of taking off his right glove, with the languid country house ease of a man who has just been admitted by a footman, whom he had until that moment supposed to be the same footman who had admitted him in late October, on the 3rd of his unannounced visits. He stopped in the doorway. He saw Henrietta. For the space of perhaps 2 seconds, his face did the thing his face had, once before, in the gravel drive, done. It became, briefly, the face of a man recalculating an entire ledger in his head. Then it returned, with the meticulousness of his usual self-control, to its languid Edmund shape, and he made, very smoothly, a small, ironical bow. Miss Marlowe. Lord Penrith. I have been given to understand, he said, that you were in London. I was. I had not, in particular, been given to understand that you had returned. You had not been given to understand it because you have, in respect of this house, no further occasion for any kind of understanding. You are not, as you have today demonstrated by the fact of being in this room, a person who can be relied upon to act on the assurances he gives. Where, she said, is His Grace? His Grace is, I am told, in the Homewood at present. He has, his housekeeper informed me at the door, gone out with the underkeeper to mark some timber, which I think we are both to understand is a polite circumlocution of the fact that he wished, briefly, not to be at home to me. His housekeeper admitted you? His housekeeper directed me to wait in the library. I have, in coming through to the morning room, exceeded that direction. He smiled. I came, in particular, to see whether the morning room had been, in my absence, redecorated. The morning room is, as you see, much as you last saw it. Lord Penrith, why are you in this house? To make you, said Edmund Hawksford, an offer. She did not for an instant move. He looked at her steadily. Miss Marlowe, I shall not pretend otherwise, on the eve of a very public ruin. My counsel is, at this moment, withdrawing the chancery suit your affidavit has rendered indefensible. My estate in Berkshire is mortgaged to a degree I shall not, this week, survive. My credit at White's is rescinded as of last night. My title is, of course, in no danger. One cannot lose marquessate to one's creditors. I shall be, by the spring, financially and socially extinct. I am, in particular, expected at Winchester on Monday morning to be convicted, in front of a magistrate who carried you on his shoulders in 1797, of an embezzlement that will dispose of any remaining latitude my title currently affords me. I am offering you, Miss Marlowe, the only thing I can offer you that I think you might, in any reduced moment, accept. I am offering you my withdrawal. You have already withdrawn from this house. I am offering you, he said, my withdrawal from England. I shall go on Monday to the continent. I shall take my passage from Dover at noon. Your affidavit notwithstanding, the warrant for the Winchester sessions does not become enforceable until Tuesday morning, and I have, by my barrister's calculation, 18 hours of grace in which I can leave the country. I shall not return. I shall not, in particular, contest the trustee committee my barrister is, this morning, transferring under writ of seisin to your aunt's solicitor on terms identical to those Adrian proposed in the gravel drive on the 6th. I am offering you, in short, a clean estate. I am offering you a clean Aldermere. I am offering you, in particular, my absence. There was a long silence in the morning room. Edmund Hawksford set down his glove on the writing desk. He did not approach her. He stood, with the courtesy of a man who has, despite himself, learned that the distance one keeps in a private exchange is more telling than the distance one closes. 4 full paces from where Henrietta stood by the fire. She looked at him. She said quietly, "Lord Penrith, why?" "I have, since the morning of the 6th, he said, had occasion to think a great deal about my late father's brother, about my own late father, about the years between my own 12th summer and Adrian's 17th, in which I lived in this house, in fact, as one of the family, a fact I had managed, in the last 15 years, very satisfactorily to forget. I had not, until the 6th, fully remembered how kind my uncle was to me in those years. I had not remembered, in particular, that he insisted on my own father's death in 1790 that I be brought down to Aldermere for the summer rather than left at school. I had not remembered, until the 6th, that my cousin Adrian, 5 years old when I first came down, was the only person in the household who did not, in his manner toward me, communicate that I was extra. He had no reason to think so. He was 5. He did, however, behave as though I belonged here. I did not, on the 6th, in the gravel drive, behave as though he belonged anywhere. His voice was very even. "Miss Marlowe, I shall not pretend that I have, in 3 weeks, become a different man. I have not. I shall, in particular, not pretend that my offer to you this afternoon proceeds from any motive nobler than my desire to get out of England without becoming, in the magistrate's role, a famous criminal. I am, at this date, perfectly capable of getting on the Dover boat without your sanction. I am, in fact, going to. I am here this afternoon to lodge, in my own hand, an instrument that you will please convey to my cousin." He drew from his inside breast pocket a single folded paper. He laid it on the writing desk, between the morning room's 2 writing pens. He did not approach her. She did not approach him. She crossed to the desk slowly, and broke the seal on the paper, and unfolded it on the leather. It was 4 lines long. The hand was Edmund's. The seal was Edmund's. The page was signed and dated this morning at his London chambers, and witnessed below by his barrister Hartley. "I, Edmund Hawksford, Marquis of Penrith, renounce in perpetuity my claim of heir presumptive to the dukedom of Aldermere, abandon all suit, present or in contemplation, against my cousin Adrian Hawksford, 6th Duke of Aldermere, and request my removal from his family's correspondence forthwith. I am very sorry. E. H. Asterisk." Henrietta laid her right hand flat on the paper. She felt, under it, the smooth, rag-laid surface, and the small, almost imperceptible ridge of Hartley's seal. She raised her eyes. Edmund had taken up his glove. He was at the morning room door. "Lord Penrith." He stopped with his hand on the door handle. He did not turn. "You have heard before of my brother Tobias." "I have, Miss Marlowe." Tobias died at 14, in the autumn of 1799. He kept laughing the whole of the last week. He made me, on the last morning, promise that I would keep laughing for him. I have kept the promise, with some considerable effort, for 13 years. I have laughed, in the past month, at any number of things. I have not, in the past month, laughed at you. I would like, Lord Penrith, for it to be on the record between us, that the woman whose name you propose to enter into a chancery complaint as evidence of a duke's incapacity is, in this matter, capable of choosing not to laugh at you. I am, in any case, not going to. Whether for Tobias, or whether for some smaller reason of my own, I am not certain which this afternoon. But I am not, in any case, going to. He stood at the door for a long second. Then he said, in a voice that, for the first time since she had laid eyes on him at the soup on the 5th of November, was almost, if not quite, his own. "Miss Marlowe, I shall not pretend otherwise, relieved." He went out. Henrietta heard, very faintly, the front door close behind him in the hall. She sat down, after a moment, in the chair Adrian had been sitting in the previous Wednesday. She did not weep. She did not, this afternoon, in the morning room, exactly laugh either. She put the folded paper into the leather case. She set the case at her feet. She put her thumb against the inside of her right wrist, where Adrian's blue ribbon, neatly retied that morning at Wantage in front of the innkeeper's wife, still lay across the place where Tobias's had been 13 years ago. The lilac bough beyond the morning room window, frost-rimmed, bare, leafless, the colour of polished pewter in the 4 o'clock light, stood very still in the November wind. She thought deliberately, in April, this will be in blossom. In April, this exact bough will hang heavy with that almost too purple of opening lilac that always, somehow, smells of laundry day. In April, I shall be in this room with him, and we shall look out by the morning light at that same bough in flower, and I shall remember Edmund Hawksford taking off his glove on this very writing desk, and not being either welcome or denied. And I shall remember that the world did not, in November, end. The world simply continued. Which is, I think, what Tobias would have wanted, possibly more than the laughing. She heard then the front door open in the hall. She heard the housekeeper say something low and brisk. She heard Adrian's boots on the marble. She did not stand up. The morning room door opened. Adrian Hawksford came in. He stopped on the threshold when he saw her. "Henrietta." "Adrian." "Edmund." "Edmund has come and gone, my dear. He has, in particular, lodged a renunciation of his claim of heir presumptive. He has, in addition, withdrawn the chancery suit. He is going to the Continent on Monday." "Henrietta." "Yes." "You are home." "I am home." "You came in by the conservatory." "I came in by the conservatory." "You did not ring." "I did not ring. I did not, this afternoon, wish to be announced. I wished, in fact, very specifically, to walk into this house in the way that women who are coming home walk into the houses they are coming home to. I have, Adrian Hawksford, considered the matter at some length over the last 4 days. I have considered it on the road. I have considered it over a chop in Holborn. I have considered it in your housekeeper's borrowed bonnet. I have considered it at 3 in the morning in an inn at Wantage with a candle that smoked. I have, very particularly, considered it at the moment when your cousin laid his withdrawal on this writing desk. I am not, on 12th night, going to make you wait." He had been at the door. He came in 3 steps across the morning room. He stopped, with that same care he had taken on the morning of the 6th, at a distance of 4 paces from her chair. "Henrietta, I am giving you, Adrian Hawksford, leave to ask before Saturday. Today is, by the morning room calendar, still Saturday. You have, by my reckoning, half an hour left." He crossed the 4 paces. He did not, this time, sit on the edge of the writing desk. He went down, quite simply, without theatre, on one knee in front of her chair, took her right hand between his 2, looked up at her face in the late afternoon light and said, "Henrietta Marlowe, will you marry me? I should very much like to be married in April when the lilacs come out. I should very much like to have my conservatory bell jar ready for the bouquet by the 3rd week of the month. I should, in particular, like to spend the rest of my life being startled by your laugh in any room in this house I happen to be in. I have, I am told, a great deal further to go before I am the man you deserve to be married to. I should very much like to spend the rest of it going the rest of the distance with you. Will you have me?" She did not, in answer, weep. She did not, in fact, even laugh. She did, very simply, lay her free hand against the side of his face, the place where his jaw was hollow with the long ride to the home wood and back, and she said, "Adrian, I shall. Yes, of course I shall. Stand up. You will please kindly not, on the morning of our wedding in April, propose to me a second time on your knee in this morning room. I should hate for it to lose its singularity." He laughed, quietly, with his head against the side of her hand, and stood up. He drew her up with him. He kissed her, for the first time, with the entire careful slowness he had been preparing without knowing he had been preparing it, at 25 minutes past 4 in the afternoon of Saturday the 28th of November, in the morning room at Aldermere, beside the writing desk on which Edmund Hawksford's renunciation lay open in his cousin's hand. She kissed him back. The fire in the morning room settled, with a small, contented hiss, into the warm. Mrs. Pellew, in the corridor outside, had her hand on the door handle and, with the brisk competence of a 41-year housekeeper who has, at last, judged correctly the difference between now and not yet, withdrew her hand without turning the handle, set down the tea tray she had been about to bring in on the half-moon table in the corridor, and went, instead, to the conservatory to tell the under-gardener that, yes, finally, Henderson. Yes, please cut, from the south-facing wall, the first sprig of winter jasmine that the conservatory has yet to release this season. It is, today, required for the morning room. In the 3rd week of April, the lilac on the south parterre opened, earlier than the gardener's almanac had predicted, in a thick cluster of that very particular purple that smells, somehow, of clean linen in a sunny corridor. And the wedding was held in the small Norman church at Aldermere Village on Easter Tuesday at 11:30, with Lady Caroline Murchison in the front pew, in a frankly magnificent ruby pelisse that she had refused to be talked out of by any of her 3 daughters, with Adelaide as Henrietta's only bridesmaid in saffron, because Adelaide had, by this date, decided that saffron was a matter of personal identity, with Lord Esmond Plover giving Henrietta away in his old regimental coat, because Henrietta had asked him to, and he had, privately, in his study, at 8:20 on the morning of the announcement, wept twice, and then put on the coat to make sure it still fit, and with Mr. Wickham reading, in his clear lawyer's voice, the registry on which the date of the trust's full repayment was now formally recorded in his own hand. Mrs. Pellew did not, in the event, attend the service. She supervised instead the wedding breakfast at Aldermere, and met the bridal party at the conservatory door on its return, with the kind of brisk, satisfied composure that allowed her to bob, briefly, to Henrietta, now Duchess, and then to fold her hands in front of her grey serge apron and say, "Your Grace, welcome home." "Mrs. Pellew, you are, I am pleased to note, in the emerald." Adelaide insisted on the emerald. Adelaide was, on this occasion, perfectly correct. The undergardener has, in his own time and on his own initiative, cut a single sprig of the south parterre lilac for your writing desk in the morning room. He felt, he tells me, that it ought to be on your desk by 2:30 in the afternoon of the wedding day. I shall require, in the course of the next 12 months, to lose him to your service entirely. He has, in his own quiet way, decided that he is your gardener now, and not the house's. I shall not, in the meanwhile, object. Mrs. Pellew. Yes, Your Grace. My husband and I, in October next, are going to attempt to do the conservatory floor in tessellated stone. I have, in particular, decided that the small antechamber off the conservatory ought to be put back into use as a writing room for the Duchess of Aldermere. I shall not, however, decide on the floor tile of the writing room without your opinion. Your Grace. Mrs. Pellew. I shall be flattered, in fact, to give my opinion. I shall be even more flattered, you understand, to be asked. She paused, an almost imperceptible glint at the corner of her mouth. Will the tessellation, Your Grace, be diapered, or will it be, as I should slightly prefer, on the strength of 41 years in this house, a simple plain border? A simple plain border. Then we shall agree, Your Grace, on the floor tile. She bobbed again and went into the conservatory to direct the undergardener about a second sprig. Adrian, emerald gown notwithstanding, the colour of which had altered his sense of what an English April was for, in ways he had not, at the morning's vestry rehearsal, anticipated, laid his right hand in the small of his wife's back, and said, very quietly into her hair, Henrietta, the morning room writing desk has, you understand, a single sprig of lilac on it as of 2 minutes ago. I had heard. It is, I am told, the third sprig of lilac in 24 hours. There is a fourth, she said. I cut it myself this morning, on the way down. It is by the green bedroom's writing table. I had, this morning, a small private piece of business I wished to complete at that desk before coming down. And did you complete it? I did. What business? She drew his right hand into her own. She turned the ribbon at her wrist, the blue Bond Street linen, still tied in the bow he had made on the morning of the 19th of November, around, so that the small pad of her thumb pressed, for a fraction of a second, against the inside of his wrist. I made, she said, a small adjustment to a promise I made when I was 12. I have been carrying it for 13 years. I have, today, formally subdivided it. I shall keep laughing, yes, for Tobias. But I shall also, in future, occasionally laugh for the household I have just married into. I find, I am pleased to report, Adrian Hawksford, that the second arrangement is rather more elastic than I had supposed at 12. He pressed his thumb against the bow. He laughed, quietly, into her hair, in the cool April air at the conservatory door, with the south parterre's lilac heavy on the wind, and the rooks of the homewood already in mid-evening conference, and Mrs. Pellew, somewhere inside the morning room, audibly setting down a third sprig in a fresh stem glass. And Henrietta laughed back. In April, then, he said. In April, and after. She rested her head for a second against his shoulder. The lilac bough beyond the conservatory glass, heavy, opened, almost too purple, stood very still in the late afternoon light, on the same Norman wall against which Adrian Hawksford had once, at 19, stood with his back flat to the brick, and waited for someone to tell him what to do. She set her cup down on the conservatory's little white table. He closed the conservatory door behind them.